Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. Um, Late on the afternoon, I know you have choices of venues, so thank you for coming to participate in this conversation on AI and the future of warfare. As we've been hearing about for the last couple of days, we are going through a moment of intense, often rapid technological disruption and development, and that's having a profound impact on the landscape of warfare. And we heard earlier from Eric during the lunchtime session about how AI is a critical part of that evolution, impacting geopolitics, impacting great power competition, and also impacting strategic and operational landscapes. So that's what we'll be talking about this afternoon. I'm really pleased to be joined by my colleague, Jack Detsch. Jack's the FP Pentagon and National Security Reporter. Jack, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Tim.
It's good to see you. We've only got 10 minutes, so we obviously can't cover everything. But let's start off with what you're seeing in terms of military applications on the battlefield today. You've spent a lot of your time over the last couple of years focused on Ukraine. And one of the big things that we're seeing in Ukraine is the deployment of often cheap, often expendable, rapidly deployable UAS systems. We're seeing elsewhere in places like the Iran attack on Israel last month, the deployment of swarms of drones in large numbers, 170 in that case, alongside other aerial assets. Talk to us a little bit about how AI and UAS systems are going to impact the battlefield as systems get increasingly autonomous, potentially the deployment of lethal autonomous systems capable of making decisions in theater with less and less human involvement. That seems to be a critical element of the battle space right now. So talk to us a little bit about that and any other trends that you're seeing as of today.
That's right. I think it's a dichotomy. You have on one end the Ukrainians that are fighting an active war, don't care as much about kill switches, don't care as much about necessarily human in the loop. They want their soldiers as far back as possible from the front lines and have AI launch the drones. We're not necessarily there yet. But you have on the other side, the American military, all Western militaries that would like to see more human in the loop, more development of rules and regulations. So a couple months ago, I was out at the Project Convergence experiment the Army's been putting on, and you just saw a lot of desire to have humans in the loop, to have ethicists, to have the development of those rules, regulations, and standards. So a little bit more tepid on the Western side and a little bit more active among the Ukrainians. Also, you see with the Russians, the Chinese, other folks that are involved in this space. But I think we're going to see it evolve from this battle space management function where you have the deconfliction of airspace with AI, more routine techniques, to something a little bit more active. You already see even in the U.S. military, the consideration of the use for targeting the Israelis, very active with their Lavender tool that's being used on the battlefield in Gaza. So I think it's just only going to speed up rapidly and much more rapidly in the next few years.
Yeah, it's super interesting. What about in other areas that you're tracking, Jack? Areas like information operations, in logistics management, those sorts of areas. What are you seeing in terms of AI's current impact?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, you see such a desire to regulate airspace now with just the proliferation of drones coming into space. You see in the Ukraine war, for instance, just so many drones overhead over Ukrainian battle space. People can't identify which are friend or foe. So that's going to be a critical role for AI coming into the future. You definitely see a need for logistics just to manage and map everything that's out there. There are very fascinating tools I was looking at in the Army's tests where you see a desire to take one soda straw information of intelligence and really begin to map out enemy units using AI, allowing AI to cull through the data. So just as these AIs are trained with more and more data and going faster and faster, I think you'll just see it continue to evolve, not just in the logistics space, but also at least in the intelligence-driven targeting space, if not the targeting space for some folks that are a little bit more aggressive here.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit more about those future developments and think a little bit more long-term, out over the next 5-10 years or so. You've written recently about the extent to which robotics may become such a prevalent part of the future battle space. So you spent some time out with the US Army investigating their development and deployment of robots to take the place of humans in the most dangerous missions on the battlefield. Makes a lot of sense, and certainly keeps the human out of harm's way. We've also been focused on some of the Israeli efforts during the ongoing conflict with Hamas, using AI-augmented algorithms in their targeting practices. And again, that's raised some questions that we've been exploring around the extent to which that creates perhaps unexpected, perhaps quite dangerous human-machine interactions. So there's a couple of core areas that are critical as we think to the future and how AI is going to be more heavily deployed alongside other systems. What do you see happening? What do you anticipate over the next 5-10 years in this space as it relates to the future battlefield?
Yeah, there are a couple of things to unpack there. I think first you see rapid development of the human-machine teaming when it comes to the military and robotics. So we've already seen the Army announce that they're considering developing human-machine teams. That'll be rolled out very soon, and we'll see if that can take effect. The challenge is these are robots that are very hard to maintain. The ground robots, if you knock out a sensor, they're basically gone. So you have the challenge of having a broken robot in the middle of a battlefield under fire, trying to bring it back in. That's not a situation anyone in the military wants to be involved in. And certainly in the practice field, going out with the U.S. Army, we saw certain things that might get humans killed in the future if people weren't careful, right? The jamming of the Army's own networks, for instance, was one thing that people were very worried about. I think when it comes to the AI and ethics piece, that's something that I've heard a lot of concern about around town, just with the Israeli tool, for instance. If you're developing this targeting and the targeting is not 100% on point when it comes to having AI involved in the targeting decisions, are you training the AI to make bad decisions, to make decisions that don't respect human rights? And so that's going to be a major debate. Certainly as Rafah is ongoing, we'll see what the prospects are for a ceasefire. But if this campaign continues, that's going to come very highly into focus for the rest of 2024.
Okay, interesting. Well, we'll come back to ethics and some of the regulation around AI here in a second. Let's talk a little bit about great power competition. We can't have an event like this without talking about great power competition. So this spread, Jack, of AI-enabled technology has led a lot of people, we've been exploring it ourselves, to speculate as to whether we are in an AI arms race. Eric Schmidt talked about it earlier today during the lunchtime session. And there's even more speculation beyond that even if we aren't in an AI arms race, just the perception that we're in an AI arms race might lead particular actors, governments, companies, to take steps and take them quickly that ultimately, to the point you were making a moment ago, Jack, lead them inadvertently or deliberately to cut corners or to do things as they relate to AI that potentially put at risk the safety and regulation aspects. So what's your take of where we're at right now, Jack? Are we in an AI arms race? If we are in an AI arms race, who's playing? Who's running? Let's not mix the analogies. Who's running that race? Who's winning the race? And how's that going to play out over the next few years?
Well, I think we're racing across the technological space with Russia, with China. Great power competition has spilled out into the technological field, not just with AI. Of course, America has unique advantages, right? We have Silicon Valley, we have Microsoft, we have OpenAI, we have all of these built-in advantages, built-in companies that are part of the American innovation space. We'll see sort of how that partnership and linkage between Silicon Valley and the U.S. government continues to evolve. Certainly, it's sped up with Ukraine, where you actually saw people concerned about the ethics, the prospects, the laws that were being broken with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But it's still an open game. China has a lot to do. They have a lot of ability, the Chinese and the Russians, as we've seen in cyberspace for years and years, to actually, as an actor of the state, take people from the innovation space and deploy them on behalf of the state. So that's going to be one of the challenges. Is sort of the liberal model of technological development, of innovation, going to win out, or is it going to be a more autocratic model?
Yeah, and that certainly came up in other sessions we've been listening to this this past couple of days, this notion that in some areas, China seems to have the upper hand, but in the core area around an innovative culture, the US still seems to have the advantage. So let's talk. I said we'd come back a little bit to regulations, and as a sort of penultimate question for you, obviously there are a whole host of really positive developments as they relate to AI. We should stress that if we haven't said that properly already. We're not here saying this is all doom and gloom by any means. I hope that's clear. This can help create a safer battle space. It can keep, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, humans out of harm's way. It might help with deterrence preparation, and it can certainly help in sort of quote unquote softer areas. We've been exploring, for instance, at FP, the potential role for AI in helping with pandemic preparedness, for instance, using AI to better detect, predict, mitigate the effects of future pandemics. So there are, of course, a lot of positives. The flip side, Jack, is that if it's left unattended, without the guardrails, without any regulations at the right time, as Eric was describing earlier today, there's the potential for a lot of risk and some unintended consequences as well. So what do we need as regards regulation, and when do we need it? What are the sort of drivers that you're focused on that create the necessity for some of the topics you mentioned around more ethical considerations, rules of engagement in theater, and so on?
Well, so I think we'll all be interested to see the results of Senator Schumer's investigation into AI regulation and ethics that he announced on stage earlier today. I think one thing that I'm looking forward to is, again, the ratio to humans versus machines, as you were talking about earlier. One thing that really came up in talking to the Army and the U.S. military, I was talking to the Chief of the Army, Randy George, a couple of months ago, and he said there's always going to be a human in the loop at this point in time. You're not going to have robots running around unsupervised. You're not going to have a Terminator. But certainly there are going to be people, as we were talking about, that are interested in the model of having fewer humans in the loop, of having more robotics, more AI, as a prevalent force, especially to drive down the human costs. We already see with the Ukrainians just having trouble mobilizing enough forces to fight against the Russians. There's a huge interest in robotics, AI, drones. They've announced their own initiative. So we may see that model pick up, but certainly in the United States, humans will be in the loop for some time.
Yeah, super interesting. One last question for you, then we'll let you go, because I know you're moderating a session yourself here shortly. What's the big one thing, Jack, that's keeping you awake at night when you think about AI and warfare? Your classic question. Everyone has to ask that. So what's your big keep you up at night issue that you're worried about, and talk to us a little bit about why?
I'm so fascinated by this concept of self-learning. I mean, as AIs are taught and trained by human beings, and then the human beings distance themselves. I mean, just the question we were talking about with Israel and Lavender, are you going to see AIs training themselves to make bad ethical decisions on the battlefield, to make poor ethical decisions or poor regulatory decisions in other spaces of the marketplace? It's going to be fascinating to see as this picks up.
Awesome. A quick whirlwind of a few topics. Again, it's a short session. We can't cover everything. Thank you to Jack for your insights. If you want to hear a little bit more from Jack, as I mentioned, he'll be moderating a session at 4 p.m.
4 p.m.
4 p.m. on the center stage looking at AI innovations over the next decade. So do stop by that. Thank you for attending. Appreciate it.
Thank you.